Fog, thick as a shroud, smothers the harbor lights of Coastal Haven. The heavy glass doors of the police station burst open, spilling the cold, wet night inside. A 10-year-old girl, Lyra, gasps for breath. Beside her, her golden Labrador, Echo, isn't just scared. He's protective. He plants himself between her and the lone detective on duty, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The girl isn't crying for herself. She's crying for the dog. Echo lowers his head and deliberately drops a small, muddy object at the detective's feet, a metal whale pendant, glinting like a forgotten tear. It's the first key to a house of gray curtains, a house ruled by a polite, cold stepfather with an immaculate smile. That man doesn't know the whale is more than a trinket. It's a link to a missing mother, a secret laboratory, and a USB drive hidden inside a music box. And when Echo acts, the fog will part, revealing a truth more terrifying than any storm, and a loyalty that can find a family lost at sea. What happens next will make you believe in the fierce courage of a child and the unbreakable bond that saves us. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe true loyalty can conquer any evil, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. Coastal Haven, California, was a city that sold a lie. By day, it peddled postcards of sun-drenched piers and charming pastel-painted boutiques. By night, it surrendered to the truth. The fog, an entity unto itself, reclaimed the streets. It was an advection fog, born miles out in the cold, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, and it rolled inland not as a gentle mist, but as an invading army. It was thick, opaque, and carried the smells of its origin, the primal salt of the deep ocean, the acrid diesel of the fishing fleet, and the subterranean decay of the low-tide mudflats. The fog suffocated sound, turning the sharp, distant bark of a sea lion into a muffled cough, and it blurred the streetlights into weak, cataract smudges that offered neither guidance nor comfort. This was the shroud that draped Coastal Haven tonight, a tangible weight pressing down on the asphalt, and the secrets buried beneath it. It was through this oppressive gray void that she ran. Lyra Vance, 10 years old and weighing less than a stray sack of grain, pumped her thin legs, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged, visible clouds. Her dark shoulder-length hair was plastered to her pale cheeks by the damp, and the oversized denim jacket she wore, a relic from a happier time, was useless against the penetrating cold. Her small sneakers, worn through at the toes, slapped wetly against the pavement, a desperate, frantic rhythm in the near-total silence. Beside her, running in perfect protective synchronization, was Echo. He was a golden Labrador, though in the spectral light he looked like a wolf sculpted from shadows. At 4 years old, Echo was in his prime, a 90-pound mass of muscle, loyalty, and intuition. His magnificent golden coat was dark and heavy with moisture, and his head was held low, not in submission, but in focus, his paws churning silently, his entire being concentrated on the small human he was sworn to protect. They were a frantic pairing, a wisp of a girl and her powerful guardian, fleeing a darkness that the fog merely amplified. They burst through the double-glass doors of the Coastal Haven Police Department like a detonation of fear, collapsing into the stark, fluorescent reality of the lobby. The air inside was aggressively bright, sterile, and smelled of industrial-strength coffee and the sharp antiseptic tang of floor cleaner. A lone dispatcher, a weary-looking woman named Trish, looked up from her screen, her glasses sliding down her nose, startled from her late-night stupor. But it was the man who emerged from the hallway who commanded the room, even in his state of exhaustion. This was Detective Caleb Ridge. Caleb was a man carved from the same coastal rock that defined the shoreline, all hard angles and weather-beaten resilience. He was 38, though the nights in Coastal Haven had tried to age him faster. He was tall, with a solid, wide-shouldered frame that spoke of his past as a Marine MP before the disillusionment set in. His dark brown hair was cut short, practical, and his face was a map of sharp planes, a strong jawline shadowed by 12 hours of stubble, a straight nose, and a mouth that rarely smiled. His most arresting feature, however, was his eyes. They were a startling, clear gray, the color of the ocean just before a storm, and they held a deep, chronic weariness, as if he were perpetually staring at an unsolved puzzle. He was, in fact. Caleb Ridge was haunted by the fog cases, a string of unsolved disappearances of transients and vagrants from the harbor district, cases that everyone else had written off as voluntary departures. but which he felt as a cold spot in his gut. He had been nursing a cup of toxic, lukewarm coffee, staring at the fog-blinded window and thinking about those missing men, when the girl and the dog had exploded into his world. Lyra stumbled, her legs finally giving out. She landed hard on the polished linoleum, gasping, her small chest hewing. Echo instantly spun into a defensive posture, planting himself between Lyra and the two adults, his broad chest rising and falling, a low tectonic growl vibrating in his throat. He wasn't threatening the officers, he was issuing a proclamation. I protect her. Caleb raised his hands slowly, palms out. His voice was the opposite of the environment. It was low, calm, and held an unexpected warmth. Hey, it's okay. You're safe in here. Easy, boy, he said, his gaze shifting from the terrified child to the magnificent, wary animal. Lyra scrambled to her knees, her hands grabbing the back of Echo's harness. The growl stopped, but the dog's body remained taut as steel. Please, she gasped, the single word cutting through the quiet station. She wasn't looking at the dispatcher. She was locked onto Caleb. She had seen something in his tired gray eyes that she recognized, a shadow, like her own. Please, you have to help. Of course, Caleb said, crouching down slowly, moving with the practiced ease of someone used to dealing with volatile situations and frightened witnesses. He didn't crowd her. I'm Detective Ridge. What's your name? Lyra Vance. Her voice was a small, trembling reed. She was shaking violently now, the adrenaline fading, the icy cold of her clothes seeping into her skin. Okay, Lyra, what's going on? Who are you running from? Lyra's eyes, a deep, intelligent blue, filled with a sudden, overwhelming terror. She shook her head, a frantic negative motion. It's not me. It's him. She pointed a trembling finger at Echo. You have to hide him. Please, you have to hide Echo. Caleb frowned, his professional assessment running. The girl was terrified, but not for herself, for the dog. It was an unusual, disarming priority. Hide him? Why? Is he hurt? No, Lyra whispered, tears finally breaking free, tracing clean paths through the grime on her face. He found something in the yard, and he saw. He? Your stepfather? Caleb asked, his voice gentle. He had seen the name Vance on his blotter before, connected to a welfare check 8 months ago, when the mother, Eleanor, had supposedly left town. The check had been closed. Silas Thorne, the stepfather, had been perfectly polite, perfectly reasonable. Caleb's gut had soured then, and it was souring now. Lyra nodded, her small body rigid with fear. Silas. He saw Echo digging. Echo found it. Found what, Lyra? As if summoned by the words, Echo nudged Lyra's hand with his wet nose. She uncurled her frozen fist. She wasn't holding anything. Echo, she whispered. Show him. The dog, who had been watching Caleb with an unnerving intelligence, hesitated, then stepped forward. He lowered his head and gently, delicately, spat a small object onto the floor between them. It landed with a soft, metallic clink. Caleb leaned in. It was a pendant, small and caked with dark, loamy soil. Despite the dirt, its shape was unmistakable, a small, gracefully curved whale. It looked old, the silver or pewter oxidized to a dull black. He found this by the old oak tree, Lyra explained, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. It looks just like the one on my mom's music box, the one he locked away. Caleb felt a cold jolt, the kind that signaled a case was about to break, or a life was about to end. He looked from the muddy pendant back to the girl. Silas saw Echo find this? Lyra began to tremble so hard her teeth chattered. He grabbed the shovel. He said Echo was a dirty, digging menace. He said... She choked on a sob, burying her face in the dog's damp fur. What did he say, Lyra? Caleb's voice was sharper now, the warmth replaced by a focused urgency. Lyra lifted her head. Her blue eyes were wide, vacant with a horror that no 10-year-old should ever possess. She locked her gaze with Caleb's, and the final devastating truth fell from her lips, landing in the sterile air of the police station with the weight of a body. He said he was going to deal with Echo, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just like he dealt with my mom. The silence that followed Lyra's accusation was a living thing, heavier and more toxic than the fog outside. It filled the sterile lobby. amplifying the drip, drip, drip of Lyra's soaked jacket onto the linoleum and the low, buzzing hum of the fluorescent lights. Trish, the night dispatcher, had frozen, her hand halfway to her radio, her face pale. But Caleb Ridge didn't freeze. His storm-gray eyes locked on Lyra's, and for a fraction of a second, the weariness was burned away by a cold, sharp focus. This was the moment the ground shifted, the moment a simple welfare check becomes a recovery operation. He scooped the small, muddy whale pendant from the floor, its oxidized metal cold against his palm, and stood up in one fluid motion. He had his evidence, and he had his witness. "Trish, call Maya Chen," he said, his voice a low command that cut through the silence. "Tell her I have a priority 417 at the station, and I need her here. Now." A 417 was code for child endangerment, a call that pulled rank over any other. He then looked at Lyra, his voice softening just enough. "Lyra, you and Echo are coming with me. We're going to a more comfortable room. You are not in any trouble." He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, and she flinched, but didn't pull away. He turned, guiding her and the dog past the dispatcher's desk, down a hallway to a room designated for exactly this nightmare. It was officially the family interview room, but cops called it the soft room. It had pale blue walls, a small table with rounded corners, and 2 chairs upholstered in a durable, unoffensive fabric. It was a room designed to be non-threatening, but it still smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and unspoken trauma. He left the door open a crack, a psychological trick to make her feel less trapped. Echo immediately did a low-threat sweep of the room, sniffing the corners before settling at Lyra's feet, his wet body a solid germ barrier against the world. He was watching Caleb. "He stays with me," Lyra stated. It wasn't a question. "For now, absolutely," Caleb agreed. "Lyra, the pendant, you said it was from your mom's music box?" She nodded, her small, cold hands twisting in her lap. "It's a music box. It's heavy, made of dark wood. It has a little silver keyhole on the side, and on the top, it has a whale, just like this one," she said, tapping the pendant he'd placed on the table. "My real dad gave it to her. It plays a song, Claire de Lune. She used to wind it up every night for me." The memory brought a fresh wave of tears, and she scrubbed them away angrily with the back of her hand. After she left, Silas took it. He said it was just clutter. He put it in the attic, in the locked part. He locked all her things away. Caleb absorbed this. Silas hadn't just removed a person, he had curated an extinction. He was erasing Eleanor Vance, piece by piece. The music box was a totem of the mother, and the pendant, a lost piece of that totem, had been unearthed by the dog. "You said Silas saw Echo find this tonight?" "He was outside," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. "He was smoking on the porch, watching the fog. Echo was digging. He loves digging by the oak tree. And he brought me the whale. I was so happy. I thought it was a sign from Mom." Her voice broke. Silas saw it, his face. It went all wrong, all tight and quiet. He grabbed Echo's collar. He said, "That's where that went." And he told me to go to my room, that he was going to clean up the dog's mess. I heard him get the big shovel from the shed. I knew he was going to hurt him. She looked up at Caleb, her blue eyes blazing with a desperate, adult clarity. "Sill." Before he could respond, a sharp knock echoed at the door, followed immediately by its opening. "Trish said 417. What's the... Oh." The woman who entered was a precise, contained burst of energy. This was Maya Chen. She was in her early 30s, with intelligent, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to take in the entire situation. The wet girl, the massive dog, the weary detective, the whale pendant on the table, in a single, comprehensive glance. She was shorter than Caleb, slender, but with a wiry, restless strength. Her dark, pin-straight hair was pulled back into a severe, practical bun, and she wore a sharp navy blazer over a simple white blouse and dark jeans, as if she were perpetually ready for either a courtroom or a crisis. Her face was sharp-boned and unlined, and she carried a worn brown leather satchel over her shoulder. "Detective Ridge," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Maya, thanks for coming in. This is Lyra Vance. Lyra, this is Ms. Chen. She's here to help you." Maya's entire demeanor shifted. The professional sharpness softened, her eyes warming as she crouched down, not getting too close, but bringing herself to Lyra's level. "Hi, Lyra. That's a beautiful dog. What's his name?" "Echo," Lyra whispered. "Echo. That's a perfect name for a dog this smart. He looks like he takes good care of you." Maya's gaze flicked to Caleb, a silent, information-heavy exchange passing between them. "How bad?" Caleb's expression answered, "As bad as it gets." "I need to make some arrangements," Caleb said, using the moment as an excuse. "Maya, I'll be right back." "Lyra, Echo can't stay in the station all night, but I have a large, warm kennel in the back, just for him. I'm going to get it ready. I promise he'll be safe. You can come see it, okay?" Lyra looked at Echo, then at Caleb, and gave a tiny, reluctant nod. This trust was a fragile, priceless thing, and Caleb knew it. He stepped out, leaving Maya to begin her work, and walked quickly to his desk. He slipped the whale pendant into an evidence bag, tagged and dated it. Then, he sat down and pulled up the file on Silas Thorne. He ran his name through the local and federal databases. The file was thin, a few speeding tickets, a past address. But then, under employment history, Caleb's blood went cold. Employer, Blackwood Industries. Position, logistics manager. Dates, 2018-23, Blackwood Industries. The name slammed into him. It was the defunct construction and shipping company at the center of his fog cases. The file on the missing transients that sat in a cardboard box under his desk, the one his captain told him to let go of. The company had gone bankrupt overnight, its owners vanished, its facilities abandoned. And Silas Thorne had been a manager there, right up until the time the disappearances stopped. Caleb stared at the screen, the pieces clicking together in a dreadful, jagged pattern. This wasn't just a domestic violence case. This wasn't just a missing mother. This was the dark, sprawling conspiracy he'd been chasing. And a 10-year-old girl and her dog hadn't just run from it. They had run through it, dragging its first solid piece of evidence out of the ground and dropping it at his feet. The secret investigation wasn't just beginning. It had just been lit on fire. The harsh, sterile light of the next morning did nothing to dispel the previous night's dread. It only scraped the shadows away, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. The Pacific fog had retreated, leaving Coastal Haven feeling scoured and exposed. Inside the station, Caleb Ridge stood over a tactical map of the city, the cold, muddy whale pendant sitting in an evidence bag on his desk like a dead scorpion. The adrenaline of the discovery, the Blackwood link, had faded, replaced by the methodical, grinding procedural engine of a real investigation. Lyra had been placed in Maya Chen's temporary protective custody overnight, a small mercy, while Echo was secured at a K-9-certified foster home linked to the department, a place of warmth and safety. But this was only a temporary hold. The law was a blunt instrument, and Silas Thorne still held all the legal cards. "He's going to lawyer up the second he senses us," Caleb said, his voice flat. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the last 4 hours pulling every shred of data on Blackwood Industries, confirming its status as a shell company that had dissolved 3 days after the last fog case disappearance. "So, this visit has to be by the book. You're the primary, I'm just backup." Maya Chen, looking just as sharp and focused as she had at 3 a.m., nodded curtly. She had traded her blazer for a less formal, but still professional, olive green knit cardigan. "It's a standard welfare check, escalated by her running away. We go in, we assess the environment, we speak to the guardian, and we speak to the child in the environment. Our hands are tied on removal unless we see immediate physical danger. And Lyra," she added, her voice tightening almost imperceptibly, "has no marks on her." "He's not a physical abuser," Caleb muttered, his jaw tight. "He's a curator. He erases things. People." The house sat on a quiet, respectable street 2 miles from the harbor, a small, single-story craftsman that was desperately trying to be unremarkable. It was painted a flat, neutral gray, and every single window was masked by a thick, matching gray curtain, giving the house a blind, secretive face. It was a place that repelled attention. Caleb parked their unmarked sedan at the curb. He and Maya walked Lyra, who was clutching a small backpack Maya had given her, to the door. The girl was pale, her small hand trembling in Maya's, but her eyes were dry and fixed, a tiny soldier marching back into enemy territory. Caleb rang the bell. The silence that followed was absolute, lasting just long enough to feel calculated. Then, the lock clicked and the door opened. He was not what they expected. Silas Thorne was not a monster in appearance. He was a man defined by a chilling antiseptic neatness. He was tall and exceptionally thin, with a gaunt frame that his crisp, button-down shirt seemed to hang from. His sandy blonde hair was thinning, but combed with obsessive precision over a pale, high forehead. He had no facial hair, and his skin was smooth and almost translucent, as if he never stood in the sun. But his eyes were the color of stagnant water, a pale, hazy blue-gray, and they were utterly devoid of light. They registered Caleb's size, Maya's official badge, and Lyra's presence with the same flat, unemotional appraisal. He smiled, a thin, dry stretching of the lips that did not touch his eyes. Ms. Chen, detective, and Lyra, thank goodness. I was beside myself with worry, he said. His voice was the most unsettling part, soft, articulate, and imbued with a practiced, oily sincerity. You ran off, sweetheart. You had me terrified. Please, come in. The house is a mess, I'm afraid. The house was the opposite of a mess. It was immaculate. The hardwood floors gleamed. The living room furniture, more gray, was arranged in perfect, inhospitable angles. There were no photos, no mail on the table, no sword. It was a sterile, lifeless diorama, a magazine photo of a house where no one actually lived. Mr. Thorne, Maya began, stepping into the role of the primary, her voice firm and professional. Lyra presented at the station last night. She expressed concern for her dog after a disciplinary incident. Silas managed a perfect theatrical sigh, rubbing the bridge of his long, thin nose. Ah, yes. Echo. Lyra is she's an incredibly sensitive girl, deeply imaginative. Her mother was the same. He glanced at Lyra with a look of profound, pitying disappointment that made Caleb's fists clench. The dog was digging holes by the foundation. I simply raised my voice, and I was going to lock him in the shed for the night. That was all. Lyra, you know you exaggerate. Lyra shrank, hiding behind Maya's arm, but she said nothing. We understand, Maya said, her tone level. As part of the follow-up, we just need to verify Lyra's living conditions are safe. If you could just show us her room. Of course, anything you need. Silas gestured expansively, his politeness a suffocating weapon. He led them down a short hall. He opened a door. Her room, just as her mother left it. Caleb and Maya exchanged a look. The room was not the room of a 10-year-old girl. It was a tomb. The bed was made with military precision. A single porcelain doll sat on a shelf. There were no drawings, no toys, no clothes on the floor. It was the room of a ghost, not a child. She likes to keep it tidy. She's a good girl, Silas murmured, his watery eyes fixed on Lyra. And this door? Caleb asked, pointing to a narrow, steep staircase at the end of the hall, blocked by a heavy wooden door. Silas's smile didn't waver, but his stillness intensified. Oh, that's just the attic, storage. It's a disaster area, full of old insulation and my wife's, old things. I keep it locked, for safety, dust. Caleb held the man's gaze. Your wife, Eleanor, you said she left? 8 months ago, packed a bag and walked out. No note, no goodbye. Broke Lyra's heart, Silas said, shaking his head with the same practiced sadness. I've been trying to hold us together He was interrupted. Lyra, who had been silent, suddenly let go of Maya's hand. She took 3 steps toward Silas, her face pale. Can I have my music box back? She asked, her voice small but clear as a bell. Silas's smile faltered, a tiny hairline crack in the facade. What? Sweetheart, now is not the time for... The whale one, Lyra insisted, looking up at him. The one Mama left me. You put it up there. Silas's hand twitched. He was losing control. Lyra, that's enough. It's just old clutter. Mr. Thorne, Maya cut in, her voice sharp. Is there a reason she can't have her mother's music box? Silas looked from Maya to Caleb, his mind clearly calculating. He was trapped. No reason at all. I just don't have the key on me. It's in my desk at work. I'll get it for her later. Now, if you're done... He turned, eager to shepherd them toward the door. In that moment, as Silas's back was turned, Lyra looked directly at Caleb. She had been brave, creating the distraction he needed. Her small hand lifted. She pointed one finger up, toward the locked attic door. Then, her fingers mimed the unmistakable, delicate action of turning a small key. The music box is up there. and it has a keyhole. Caleb gave no reaction, his face a mask of stone. He now had confirmation. The music box, the one item Lyra instinctively knew held a secret, was in the attic, and Silas was desperate to keep them from it. As they walked back to the front door, Silas's composure had returned. "Thank you for stopping by, Detective, Ms. Chen. I appreciate your concern." Caleb paused at the entryway. His eyes scanned the small table by the door. A bowl for keys, a stack of junk mail, and something else. It was a single heavy-duty black plastic key fob, scuffed and worn. On its surface, nearly rubbed away, was a small, stylized B inside a hexagon. Caleb's blood ran cold. He knew that logo. He had stared at it for hours on grainy surveillance stills from his cold case files. It was the corporate logo for Blackwood Industries. It was the electronic passkey for the main warehouse at the harbor, the one that had been abandoned for months. Silas Thorne didn't just work for Blackwood, he still had the key. He nodded once at Silas. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thorne. We'll be in touch." They walked back to the car in silence, Lyra sandwiched between them. The polite, sterile horror of the house settled over them. As soon as the car doors shut, Maya let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. "We can't leave her there, Caleb. That man, his eyes, that house. It's wrong." Caleb started the car, his knuckles white, on the steering wheel. "We don't have a choice. Not yet." He looked at Lyra in the rearview mirror. "But we just got the target, and I just found the key to open the door." The drive away from the house of gray curtains was thick with a shared, unspoken dread. Caleb left Maya and Lyra at a secure, undisclosed protective services apartment, a sterile place with new locks and a view of a brick wall, but one that was, for now, infinitely safer than Lyra's own home. He watched Lyra's small, pale face as Maya led her inside, the girl clutching the backpack, but her eyes fixed on Caleb. "You'll get the music box, right?" she'd asked, her voice quiet. It wasn't about the music, it was about the proof. "I'm going to work on it right now," he'd promised, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He wasn't going to the attic. He didn't have a warrant. He had a man's polite denial and a child's desperate signal, which meant nothing to a judge. He had the Blackwood key fob, but to use it now, to go to the warehouse without backup or a warrant, would be to blow the entire case, and Silas Thorne would walk. No, he needed leverage. He needed a crack in the Thorne family's foundation, and to find it, he had to go to the one piece of it that had broken off. He drove past the tourist-choked pier and across the rusted iron bridge to the other coastal haven, the one that didn't make the postcards. This was the wind-blasted side of the bay, a peninsula of rocky coves and old salt-eaten cottages populated by fishermen, artists, and recluses. He was looking for the latter. His query on Thorne in the retired officer database had pinged one name, Alara Thorne. She had been a detective 20 years ago, known for being brilliant, abrasive, and having an unnervingly high closure rate on cases everyone else had given up on. She had retired abruptly, at the peak of her career, and dropped off the grid. He found her cottage at the end of a dirt road, perched on a low cliff overlooking a churning gray sea. It was a small, tough structure, its shingles warped and silvered by the salt spray. The yard wasn't a lawn. It was a chaotic garden of hardy coastal plants and fishing nets, with a few crab pots stacked near the door. He stepped out of the car, the wind instantly whipping at his jacket. She was already there, watching him from the porch. This was Alara Thorne. She was a woman in her late 60s, but she seemed carved from the same ancient, tough material as the coastline itself. She was short, but solid, wearing a thick wool sweater over denim, her feet shoved into muddy boots. Her face was a landscape of deep wrinkles, weathered and tanned by a lifetime of sun and wind. But her eyes, they were the Thorne family eyes, that same hazy, watery blue, were shockingly alive, sharp and analytic. Her long, steel-gray hair was pulled back in a thick, practical braid. She held a gardening trowel in one hand, not as a weapon, but as if he had interrupted her, and she was annoyed by it. "You're a long way from the pier, detective," she called out, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. She hadn't been on the force for 2 decades, but she still knew the posture of a cop on a mission. "Alara Thorne," Caleb said, walking slowly toward the porch steps, keeping his hands visible. "I'm Detective Ridge. I'm with the CHPD. "I know who you are," she said, her sharp eyes appraising him. "You're the one who keeps poking the fog cases, the Sisyphus of the Harbor District. What do you want?" "I'm working a new case," he said, deciding that directness was the only currency she would trade in. It's about Silas Thorne. Alara's expression didn't change, but her body tensed. She jammed the trowel into a pot of soil. Silas, he was always a disappointment. Too weak to be a thorn, too cowardly to be anything else. What's he done? Finally get caught skimming from the till? I think he's involved in the disappearance of his wife, Eleanor Vance. And I've linked him directly to Blackwood Industries. The name landed in the salty air and hung there, heavy and toxic. Alara was very still. For a long moment, she just stared at the churning ocean. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost a whisper. "You fool, you're walking in the dark, and you're kicking at a hornet's nest, thinking it's a rock. You're not looking at Silas." "I know, I'm looking at Blackwood, at the warehouse, the old shipping." "No," she cut him off, turning to face him. Her blue eyes were suddenly fierce, the color of a gas flame. "You're looking at Silas, and you see a snake. You should be looking for the dragon. Blackwood, the warehouse, that was never Silas's. That was his father's." "Marcus Thorne," Caleb said, the name from the file. "You say that name like you're reading a phone book," Alara scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her. "Marcus Thorne wasn't a businessman. He was a king. A cold, brilliant, sociopathic king who built this entire town's economy on shadows. He built Blackwood as his personal, untouchable fortress. He didn't just run it, he was it. Silas. Silas was just the boy who held his coat. The weak link, the errand boy, the son who could never be his father, and feared him for it. Caleb processed this. Was, past tense. Marcus Thorne is deceased. County records show he was lost at sea 5 years ago. Boating accident. Alara let out a sharp, derisive bark of laughter that startled a nearby gull. Lost at sea? Marcus Thorne? A man who could navigate from here to Japan in a fog bank with a broken compass? A man who knew every current, every rock, every tidal secret of this coast? She shook her head, a look of almost pitying disgust on her face. A man who built an empire on making people lost at sea. Doesn't get lost at sea, detective. He creates them. He had a contingency for everything, including, I guarantee, his own death. You stop digging into Silas. You stop right now. You're not hunting a weak, wife-abusing coward. You're hunting the legacy of Marcus Thorne. And that legacy is a web you can't even see. And Silas is just the decoy fly, twitching to get your attention. This was the warning. She was telling him, in no uncertain terms, that the man he thought he was hunting was just a ghost's puppet. Miles away, in her small, cramped office at the county annex, Maya Chen was hitting a different kind of wall. She had settled Lyra in the apartment, the girl finally falling into an exhausted, twitchy sleep. But Maya's mind was racing. The image of that sterile, gray house, of Silas's oily, smooth politeness, of Lyra's small, brave signal. It was all wrong. She was a social worker, not a cop. Her job was to protect the child, and the law was failing her. So, she did what she did best. She dug. She wasn't looking for criminal records. She was looking for a ghost. Eleanor Vance. She started with public records, marriage licenses, property deeds, nothing but a name. She thought about what Silas had done. He erases things. He had erased Eleanor Thorne. So, Maya went further back. She started searching for Eleanor Vance, cross-referencing with Coastal Haven. She found it, buried in the archives of a local university's alumni magazine. Coastal Haven University congratulates its graduates, and there she was, a smiling, bright-eyed woman with dark curly hair, completely different from the tired, haunted image Lyra had drawn. Eleanor Vance, MS Biochemistry. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard. Eleanor Vance Biochemistry. The screen filled with links, professional journals, symposium abstracts, a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years since the date she married Silas Thorne. Maya's blood ran cold as she read the specialization. Eleanor Vance, Area of Study, Marine Biotoxins. Thesis, the isolation and synthesis of paralytic shellfish toxins and tetrodotoxin from local marine fauna. Maya stared at the screen. This wasn't a woman who just left. This wasn't a random victim. This was a highly specialized scientist, a biologist, an expert in poisons. She grabbed her phone, her hands shaking slightly. She dialed Caleb. He picked up on the first ring, his voice sounding distant, as if he were still on Alara's cliff. "Ridge." Caleb, Maya said, her voice low and urgent. I found her. I found Eleanor. What do you mean? Where? Not her body, her work. I've been digging into her past. They didn't just marry her, Caleb. They recruited her. That house, Blackwood, it's not just about shipping. Caleb was silent for a beat. What did you find, Maya? Lyra's mom, Maya said, her voice tight with the awful implications. She's a biochemist. Her specialty is toxins, the deadliest ones in the ocean. Caleb said nothing, but Maya could hear the sharp intake of his breath over the line. The sterile gray house, the shadowy, defunct corporation, and the king who faked his own death. They now had their motive, they had their asset, and they had been keeping her. The fog had returned, thick and conspiratorial, pressing against the windows of Caleb's unmarked car. It was 2 a.m., that dead, hollow hour when the city of Coastal Haven belonged only to the tide and the secrets it couldn't wash away. The Blackwood Industries warehouse loomed out of the mist, a colossal rusting monolith on the edge of the harbor. It was a dead place, its corrugated steel siding streaked with rust that looked like dried blood in the sickly yellow glow of the perimeter lights. The fog served as their cover, muffling their footsteps as Caleb and one other man moved through the shadows of the chain-link fence. You're sure that fob is still active? The man beside him whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. This was Sergeant Marcus Mac Riley, the only man Caleb trusted for a line crossing like this. Mac was a 20-year veteran of the EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit in the Army, now serving as the department's senior tech and forensics specialist. He was a man of quiet, deliberate movements. In his late 40s, he was balding, with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper goatee, and his solid, compact build was that of a man who could take things apart, from a complex bomb to a locked door, with unnerving patience. He saw the world as a series of mechanisms, and this unauthorized entry was just one more. It was on his kitchen table, Mac. He wants it active, Caleb replied, his gaze fixed on the keypad of a small, reinforced personnel door. Alara Thorne called him a decoy fly. This key is the bait. Caleb held the scuffed black plastic fob, the one from Silas's table, up to the reader. There was a pause, a beat of agonizing silence, then a sharp click, and the electronic bolt retracted with a heavy thud. Mac glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Too easy. They slipped inside, not into darkness, but into a vast, cavernous twilight. The warehouse was the size of an aircraft hangar, filled with the ghosts of industry. Moonlight, filtered through the fog, and the high, grimy clerestory windows, cast spectral beams on rows of shipping containers, stacked crates, and heavy machinery draped in tarps. The air was cold, but it was the smell that hit them first. It wasn't just the expected decay of rust, oil, and seawater. Beneath it all, sharp and acidic, was the unmistakable, sterile tang of chemicals. That's not motor oil, Mac murmured, his nose wrinkling. That's a solvent, and something acidic, like vinegar, only meaner. They moved silently, their flashlights off, letting their eyes adjust. Caleb's senses were on fire. Alara's warning about the dragon, Marcus Thorne, and Maya's discovery of Eleanor's specialty, biotoxins, echoed in his mind. This was the dragon's lair. This way, Caleb said, his voice barely a breath. He was following the chemical smell. It led them past the towering stacks of inert cargo to a section of the warehouse that was partitioned off. A new, clean wall built inside the old, decaying one. The door was modern, steel, with a high-security keypad. Max studied it. This, he said, pulling a small toolkit from his vest, is not for keeping out thieves. This is for keeping in samples. He worked for less than a minute, bypassing the electronics with a shorting tool, and the heavy door hissed open on hydraulic hinges. The smell hit them like a physical blow. It was sterile, sharp, and cold. They stepped inside, and the world changed. They were no longer in a derelict warehouse. They were in a state-of-the-art laboratory. Stainless steel tables, glowing blue readouts on centrifuges, glass-fronted refrigerators with warning labels, and a large, sophisticated ventilation hood running the length of the wall. It was pristine, and it was active. A small red light blinked on a data logging machine. "My God, Caleb," Mac breathed, his flashlight beam playing over vials and bubbling beakers. "This isn't a drug lab. This is corporate. This is R&D. Caleb moved deeper into the room, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He saw a whiteboard, covered in complex chemical formulas and equations. He saw a rack of dark labeled bottles, and he saw a small refrigerated containment unit. He looked at the label on its door. Tetrodotoxin, synthesis batch 04, EV. Eleanor Vance. She's here, or she was, Caleb said, his voice raw. This was her work, her prison. He felt a surge of cold fury. This was what she had been recruited for. Caleb, Mac called from the far side of the lab. This looks like the main office. Doors open. It was a small, functional room, separated from the lab by a thick glass window. It contained a desk, a filing cabinet, and a computer terminal. It was the nerve center. Caleb's eyes immediately went to a heavy, leather-bound book on the desk. It wasn't a scientific journal. It was a ledger. He opened it. The pages were filled with neat, precise handwriting. It was a logbook. The first few pages were shipping manifests, but the further he read, the more the cargo changed. He saw dates, and against them, names. His blood froze. He recognized one. John Doe, 4, Harbor. Fog case, 21. Beside it, a single chilling notation. Terminated. Dispersal 0400. He turned the page. Another name, another, a dozen of them. The fog cases, the men he'd been looking for, all neatly accounted for, all terminated. He had found Marcus Thorne's kill list. He kept turning, his hands shaking, until he reached the last two entries. They were different. They were separated from the others under a new heading. Assets, contained. His flashlight beam found the first name. Asset, Eleanor Vance, biochemist. Status active, site, B. She wasn't dead. Ilara was right. Marcus Thorne hadn't killed his prize asset. He had kept her. Caleb's eyes scanned the next line, searching for an unknown, and found a name he didn't even know he was looking for. Asset, Julian Vance, investigative. Status, stable. Site, B. Caleb stared at the name, his mind struggling to connect it. Julian Vance, Lyra's real father, the one who had given Eleanor the music box. The man he'd assumed was long dead or gone. He wasn't a victim. He was a hostage, taken with his wife. Caleb, we've been here too long, Mac urged, his hand on his sidearm, his senses screaming. This is actionable. This is everything. We go, and we bring the cavalry. Caleb nodded, his mind reeling. He used his phone, his hands shaking so much the first photo was blurry. He photographed the page. Assets. Site, B, not here. They weren't in the warehouse, they were somewhere else. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, he heard it. A faint electronic beep from the computer terminal on the desk, which had been dark. A single line of text had appeared on the black screen, triggered by their presence in the lab's network. Security alert. Attic sensor. Primary residence. Caleb's blood turned to ice. What? Caleb, what is it? Mac demanded. Caleb stared at the screen, the words searing themselves into his brain. Attic sensor. Primary residence. It's a trap, Caleb whispered, his voice choked with dawning horror. The fob. Us being here. It's a diversion. He's not protecting the warehouse. He's protecting the house. He thought of Lara's small, brave signal, pointing to the attic. He thought of the music box. He knew, Caleb said, already moving, shoving Mac toward the door. He knew we'd come here. He's not at the warehouse. He's at the house. He's going after Lyra. Now. The glowing green text on the terminal screen was an obscenity in the sterile darkness of the lab. Security alert. Attic sensor. Primary residence. Mac Riley instinctively reached for his sidearm, his body tensing. He's at the house, Caleb. He's in the attic. He knew we'd be here. But Caleb didn't move. He just stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle spinning wildly, and then slamming into place with brutal, terrifying clarity. His voice was a low, cold whisper. No. What no? Mac said, his voice urgent. We've been made. We go now. We can still catch him. It's a trap, Caleb said, his mind racing past the obvious. He was seeing the Thorne family, the web Ilara had described, Marcus the dragon, Silas the decoy, this lab, the key fob. It was a diversion. He wanted us to come here. He wanted us occupied. So the attic sensor? It's a double blind, Caleb said, his storm gray eyes hardening. He was already moving, sprinting for the lab door. He wants us to race to his house, to the attic, to find an empty room. He's not destroying evidence. He doesn't care about the evidence. He slammed the door open, his boots echoing in the vast dark warehouse. He's destroying the witness. He's going for Lara. The drive back through the fog-shrouded streets was a controlled, sirenless explosion. Mac drove, his knuckles white, his EOD-trained nerves keeping the sedan from skidding out on the wet pavement, while Caleb was a coiled spring of fury in the passenger seat, his radio already in hand. "Dispatch, this is Ridge. I have an active 720 at the Chen Protective Unit, 415 South Crestwood, apartment 3B. Suspect is Silas Thorne, armed and dangerous. Send all available units. Silent approach." "Where's the dog?" Mac asked, his voice a flat professional calm as he took a corner, the tires screaming. "K9 Foster. It's 3 blocks from her apartment. It's not a coincidence. He's been planning this," Caleb said, his jaw so tight it ached. "Hit it." They skidded to a stop outside the Foster home, a small bungalow. Caleb didn't wait for permission. He was out of the car, pounding on the door, his badge in the terrified-looking woman's face before she could speak. "Police, I need my dog. Now." 2 seconds later, Echo burst from the door. He wasn't the happy, placid Labrador of a family home. He sensed Caleb's panic, the sharp, chemical smell of the lab, and the scent of adrenaline. He was all business, his 90-pound frame tensed, a low growl already rumbling in his chest as he leaped into the back seat of the sedan. The door slammed, and they were gone. They saw Silas's gray nondescript sedan parked a block away from the apartment building, deliberately angled for a fast exit. "He's in there," Caleb said. He and Mac were out of the car before it stopped rolling, Echo a silent golden shadow at Caleb's heel. They didn't bother with the elevator. They took the stairs, 2 at a time, their weapons drawn, the only sound the click, click, click of Echo's claws on the concrete. As they reached the 3rd-floor landing, they heard it. A splintering crash, a woman's scream, Maya, and then Lyra's high-pitched, terrified shriek. Caleb kicked to the apartment door. The lock, already brutalized by Silas, shattered. They spilled into the small, sterile room. The scene was chaos. Maya Chen was on the floor, clutching her head where she'd been shoved against the wall, and Silas Thorne, his neat, sterile facade completely gone, his sandy hair plastered to his sweating forehead, had Lyra. He had her by the arm, dragging her toward the broken door, his other hand raised to strike. He was no longer the polite, cold curator. He was a cornered rat, his pale eyes wild. "You stupid, stupid girl," he hissed. "You couldn't just leave it." "Silas!" Caleb roared, his voice a weapon. Silas froze, his head snapping toward the door. He saw Caleb, he saw Mac, and his face contorted with pure animalistic rage. He didn't let go of Lyra. He yanked her back, using her small body as a shield. You were supposed to be at the warehouse, the attic." "Let her go, Silas. It's over." Silas laughed, a high, strangled sound. "It's not. Not until she's—" He raised his hand again, and in that split second, Caleb gave the command he'd been holding back, the one he had trained the Foster family to use in an emergency. "Echo." His voice was low and flat. "Sierra, get him." It was not a bark. It was an explosion. Echo, who had been tensed at Caleb's knee, crossed the room in a golden-furred blur. He didn't go for the arm. He went for the center of mass, slamming into Silas's side with the force of a linebacker. The impact sent Silas spinning, his grip on Lyra broken. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of shock and pain, as Echo, all training and instinct, clamped his powerful jaws onto Silas's forearm, the one that had been raised to strike the child. The dog did not chew. He held, his growl a continuous vibrating threat, his paws braced, pinning the man against the wall. Silas shrieked, a sound of agony, dropping to his knees. Mac was on him in an instant, a knee in his back, the cuffs snapping on. "Get him off! Get him off!" Silas sobbed. Caleb didn't move. He stood over Silas, his gun still trained on the man's head, as Mac secured him. "Echo, aus! Out, let go." The dog released his grip instantly, a small drop of Silas's blood on his muzzle, and returned to Lyra's side, planting himself between her and the cuffed man on the floor. Caleb holstered his weapon, his entire body shaking. "Maya, you good?" "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaky as she pushed herself up, a new hard anger in her eyes. Get him out of here! Caleb knelt in front of Lyra, who was staring at the scene, not crying, but vibrating with a strange, furious energy. It's okay, Lyra. You're safe. The attic, Lyra said, her voice hoarse. You went to the attic? No. We went to the warehouse. The sensor was a trick, Lyra shook her head, her eyes suddenly electric. The box. He was here for the box, but he was too late. She shoved her small hand into the pocket of the jeans she'd been wearing for 2 days. He's stupid. The box is just a box. This is what he wanted. She pulled her hand out. It wasn't the box. It wasn't a key. It was a tiny black rectangle, no bigger than her thumbnail, a USB drive. Caleb stared at it. Where? How? I went back, she said, the words tumbling out. Yesterday, when you were talking to him at the door. I told him I needed my teddy bear. I ran up. I knew where he kept the key, taped under the rail. I unlocked the box. It was empty. Just this, taped to the bottom. I think it's my mom. I think she's in there. She dropped the small piece of plastic into Caleb's hand, and in that moment, the entire case, the fog, the whispers, the ghosts, all of it, shrunk down to that one tiny, solid object. The tiny black USB drive felt impossibly heavy in Caleb's hand, a micro-cassette holding the weight of a dozen lives. Back in the harsh fluorescent light of his office, the energy from the confrontation with Silas was still thrumming, a high-voltage wire of adrenaline and rage. Silas was in a holding cell, screaming about his rights, his arm being treated by a medic. Maya was sitting with Lyra in the soft room, the girl finally crying, a storm of delayed terror and relief. Echo was at Lyra's feet, his head on her lap, a silent 90-pound anchor. Mac, Caleb said, his voice raw. Plug it in. Mac Riley sat at the terminal, his movements precise, wiping the single drop of blood off the drive with an alcohol swab before sliding it into the port. If this is encrypted, it could take days. She didn't encrypt it, Caleb said, looking through the partition glass at Lyra. She left it for a 10-year-old. The drive opened. It contained one file, a movie file. Its name was Claire de Lune. Mac hit play. The screen filled with the face of a woman who was both a stranger and instantly recognizable. It was Eleanor Vance. She was not the smiling graduate Maya had found, nor the ghost Silas had curated. This woman was a survivor. She was gaunt, her dark hair lank and thin, her face bruised by exhaustion, her eyes burning with a terrifying, febrile intelligence. She was in a small concrete room, lit by a single bare bulb, the camera held close to her face. Lyra, she whispered, the audio thin and tinny, my sweet, brave girl, if you are seeing this, I don't know what it means, but it means Silas failed. It means the dragon is bleeding. She took a shaky breath. He found me. Marcus Thorne. He wasn't a businessman, Lyra. He was a monster. He wanted my research. He wanted to weaponize the ocean, to make poisons no one could trace. He forced me. Tears welled, but she didn't let them fall. Julian, your father, he came looking for me. He was a journalist. He was so smart. He was investigating Blackwood, and he found me. And they caught him too. Her face hardened. The dragon. Marcus, I did something. He came to the lab. He was going to test the new batch on Julian. I had been working on an antidote. I thought it was an antidote. It wasn't. I used it on him. I stabbed him with the syringe. I poisoned the dragon, Lyra. I think I killed him. I watched him die. She looked away, a wave of sickness passing over her. But it didn't stop, she continued, her voice ragged. The organization, it just fractured. Silas, that cowardly son, he didn't take over. He just locked the doors. He's not a leader. He's a jailer. He's keeping us alive, me and Julian, as leverage, as his last desperate insurance policy. He doesn't know how to make the poison, but he knows I can. He moved us. We aren't at the warehouse. We are at Site B. Her eyes bored into the camera. He doesn't know about this. I stole this drive from a lab tech. I am uploading the file. The file itself. The file is the key, Lyra. It's the map. The whale will guide you. The video cut out. Mac was already working, his fingers flying. She's a genius. The video file, the metadata is corrupt. No, not corrupt. It's rewritten. It's not a video, Caleb, it's a data packet disguised as a video. He ran a decryption algorithm. She embedded coordinates. It's not an island. He pulled up a satellite image, a dark hexagonal shape in the ocean, 30 miles off the coast, swallowed by the raging storm that was currently pounding Coastal Haven. It's an old decommissioned military platform. Codename AEG-7, the Aegis. It's a steel fortress, rusted out, supposed to be abandoned. It's Site B. Caleb slammed his fist on the desk. This was it. This was the end game. This is no longer a CHPD operation. This is multi-jurisdictional. Get me the Coast Guard. 4 hours later, Caleb stood on the deck of a 110-foot Coast Guard cutter, the Stalwart. The world had dissolved into a chaos of noise and motion. The storm was at its peak, a furious Category 2 gale that sent green water crashing over the bow. The wind screamed, a physical force that tried to tear the breath from his lungs. He was clad in black tactical gear, his Marine-issue MP vest feeling familiar and heavy. Beside him, a team of 6 Coast Guard MSRT, Maritime Security Response Team, operators, also in black, checked to their weapons, their faces grim under their helmets. Their leader, a lieutenant named Harrigan, a man with a sharp, angular face and the steady eyes of someone who fights the ocean for a living, had been skeptical. A civilian dog detective on a maritime raid in a Force 10 storm? You're out of your mind. He's not a dog, Lieutenant, Caleb had argued, the wind whipping his words away. He's a compass. He's the only one on this planet who knows their scent. They've been in a steel box for months. Your thermal imagers won't find them. He will. He goes, or I don't. Now, Echo stood beside him on the heaving deck, his golden fur plastered to his body, his paws planted wide. He was not afraid of the storm. He was focused, his nose tasting the salt and the diesel, his entire being vibrating with the same tense, violent energy as the men around him. "There!" Harrigan yelled over the din. "Aegis! Dead ahead!" It rose from the black churning water like a rotted tooth, a massive hexagonal steel platform, battered by waves that exploded against its legs. It was a place of rust and shadows. The team's boat, a smaller, faster, rigid-hulled inflatable, pulled alongside, rising and falling on the violent swells. They jumped, one by one, across the churning gap to a rusted access ladder. Caleb went last, hauling Echo up by his tactical harness. They breached the main hatch with a hydraulic spreader, the metal screaming in protest. Inside, it was a labyrinth of cold, dripping metal corridors. The air smelled of rust, dead seawater, and the faint, unmistakable chemical tang of the lab. 2-man teams, Harrigan ordered, clear level by level, but the corridors split. One path led up, toward the main platform. The other led down, into the black, flooded legs of the station. The team hesitated. Echo did not. He pulled against his harness, not toward the obvious path, but toward the darkness. He let out a low, muffled woof, a sound of recognition, and lunged, pulling Caleb down the maintenance tunnel. "This way!" Caleb yelled. "He's got something!" They moved fast, their weapon lights cutting the oppressive dark. Echo was pulling hard, his claws scraping, following a scent trail that no human could have detected, a trail 8 months old, preserved in the stale metallic air. He led them to a solid steel bulkhead, one that wasn't on the schematics. "Mac, you're up," Harrigan said, his team setting a perimeter. Mac Riley, who had insisted on coming, set a small breaching charge. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion was a contained, deafening crack. The door blew inward. Caleb was the first one through, his light cutting the absolute blackness. "Eleanor Vance, Julian Vance." The beam found them. They were huddled in the far corner, on a thin mattress, 2 skeletal figures clinging to each other. The woman, Eleanor, looked up, her eyes wide with terror, shielding the man beside her. The man, Julian Vance, was a wreck. His beard was long, matted, and streaked with gray. His eyes sunk deep in his skull, but he was holding on to Eleanor with a fierce, protective grip. "Lyra," Eleanor whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Is she—" "She's safe," Caleb said, his own voice thick. "She's safe. She sent us." Echo, released from his harness, pushed past Caleb. He didn't bark. He walked slowly, cautiously, into the cell. He whined, a high, soft, questioning sound. Julian Vance looked up, his hollow eyes struggling to focus. The dog padded closer and gently, tentatively, licked the man's shackled hand. A sound broke from Julian, half sob, half laugh. "Echo," he breathed, his hand coming up to tangle in the dog's wet fur. "He found us. Oh, God, Eleanor. Echo, he found us." Caleb nodded to Harrigan, holstering his weapon as the team moved in with bolt cutters. "We've got them," he said into his radio, the storm raging outside, unheard, worlds away. "We're coming home." The storm that had battered the Aegis platform, the one that had mirrored the chaos of the rescue, was nothing compared to the legal and media-ish hurricane that tore through Coastal Haven in the weeks that followed. The rescue of Eleanor and Julian Vance was a story of survival that shocked the nation, but the truth beneath it, the quiet, insidious evil of Blackwood Industries, was what cleansed the city. The ledgers from the warehouse and the data logs from the Aegis lab, combined with Eleanor's harrowing testimony, were an irrefutable mountain of evidence. The fog cases were finally, tragically, closed. The dragon, Marcus Thorne, was indeed dead, confirmed by forensic evidence found in the abandoned lab, killed by the very toxins his captive scientist had been forced to perfect. His legacy, the complex web of corruption Alara Thorne had warned of, was systematically dismantled by federal prosecutors. Its smaller players, the corrupt shipping agents, the bought-off harbor masters, all turned on each other in a desperate bid for self-preservation. And Silas Thorne, the decoy fly who had become a desperate jailer, found his cold, articulate politeness offered no defense. His trial was swift. Stripped of his immaculate facade, he was revealed to be a hollow, parasitic creature, defined only by his fear of his father and his resentment of his captives. The video from Eleanor's USB drive, played in a silent, horrified courtroom, sealed his fate. He was not just an accessory. He was the key holder, the man who had actively maintained a private hell for his own gain. The judge delivered the sentence with a cold fury: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The House of Grey Curtains was seized, its contents catalogued as evidence, and the shadow it cast over the city finally began to wreck it. But while the legal battle raged, the true restoration was happening in the quiet, sun-drenched rooms of Coastal Haven General. Eleanor and Julian Vance, after weeks of intensive medical care, were slowly, painstakingly rebuilding themselves. The skeletal figures from the Aegis platform were gone, replaced by two people who looked like survivors of a shipwreck, gaunt and scarred, but undeniably alive. Julian, his matted beard shaved, revealed the sharp, intelligent jawline of the journalist he had been. His eyes, once hollow, were sharp again, observing, analyzing, and occasionally filling with a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. Eleanor, her dark hair still thin, would sit by the window for hours, her brilliant scientist's mind methodically processing the trauma, her hands, which had once handled the world's deadliest poisons, now steady as she learned to simply be again. The true medicine, however, arrived at 3 o'clock every day. Lyra Vance, no longer the terrified shadow who had fled into the fog, would burst into the room, her backpack full of school drawings and stories. And with her, always, was Echo. The dog seemed to understand the fragility of the scene. He wouldn't bound or bark. He would enter with a quiet, powerful dignity, his plumed tail sweeping in a slow, steady rhythm, and rest his heavy golden head first on Julian's lap, then on Eleanor's. He was the bridge, the warm, breathing, tangible proof that they were safe, that they were home. Lyra would sit between them, holding their hands, reading them stories from school. She was reintroducing them to the world, and in doing so, reclaiming her own childhood. The Whale music box, recovered from the attic, sat on the bedside table. It played Clair de Lune, no longer an anthem of loss, but a quiet, resilient melody of survival. The city, shaken from its postcard slumber, needed to celebrate its heroes. In a small, packed ceremony at the town hall, Echo was awarded the city's highest civilian honor. He sat on the dais, panting happily, his golden coat gleaming under the lights, accepting a framed plaque which he immediately tried to lick, and a large rawhide bone from the mayor. He was officially declared the first ever K-9 honorary member of the CHPD, a compass of courage. Caleb Ridge watched from the back of the room, standing next to Maya Chen. The fog cases that had haunted his nights were closed, their names read into the record, their ghosts finally given justice. The weariness in his storm-gray eyes hadn't vanished. It was part of him now, but it was softer, balanced by a profound sense of peace. He had found the answers he was looking for, not in the fog, but because of a child and a dog who ran out of it. Maya nudged him, a small smile on her face. "Not bad for a civilian dog," she whispered, referencing the MSRT leader's skepticism. Caleb looked at her sharp, intelligent face, and for the first time in what felt like a decade, he smiled. A real, unguarded smile. "He's not a civilian," Caleb replied. "He's family." Their hands brushed. It wasn't a romance, not yet, but it was a partnership, forged in crisis and built on a foundation of mutual respect. And it was the most solid thing in the room. Several months later, the sun was a fragile, pink-gold line on the Pacific horizon. The fog was nowhere to be seen. The air was cold, crystalline, and clean. On the shore of Coastal Haven, the real haven, a family walked. Julian and Eleanor, still thin but strong, walked hand in hand. Between them, running in frantic, joyful circles, was Lyra. She would find a piece of driftwood, her laughter as clear and bright as the morning, and throw it. Echo, a blur of golden muscle, would charge into the surf, retrieving it, returning to shake a spray of diamonds over them all. They stopped, the three of them, watching the dog play. Julian put his arm around Eleanor, pulling her close. They had survived the dragon, the jailer, and the storm. The whale pendant, cleaned and polished, hung around Eleanor's neck, a reminder not of what was lost, but of what had endured. Caleb Ridge sat in his unmarked car on the overlook, on his way to an early shift. He watched the family, the journalist who was already outlining a book, the scientist who was preparing to advocate for new biochemical ethics laws, the child and the hero dog, embrace as the sun finally cleared the water, flooding the beach with light. The haven was safe. He took a sip of his coffee, nodded once, and drove into the new day. The fog has lifted from Coastal Haven, not because the wind blew it away, but because the courage of one small girl and the loyalty of one brave dog became a light so bright no shadow could survive. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with a thunderclap from heaven. They arrive as a wet nose digging in the dirt. They come as a small, brave voice that refuses to be silenced. God did not send an army to that dark metal fortress in the sea. He sent a detective who wouldn't give up. He sent a mother who was brilliant enough to hide a map in a melody. And he sent Echo, a guardian, a compass, and a four-legged miracle who understood a love that no cage could hold. In our own daily lives, we all face a fog. It might be fear, loneliness, or a lie that seems too big to fight. This story is a reminder that you too can be a miracle. You can be the one who listens to the vulnerable, the one who speaks the truth, and the one who remains loyal, no matter the cost. If this story of faith, family, and impossible loyalty touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly lost. Comment Amen below if you believe no child or animal should ever have to face fear alone. And please, subscribe to this channel. Join our family so that more people can see these stories of courage, compassion, and the quiet miracles that surround us every day. May God bless you, and may He bless everyone who watches, and everyone who, like Echo, chooses to be a hero in the darkness.